Welcome! In this video we're going to be taking a quick look at Lilith, an epic grade debuffer class Elune. Looking in at her base stats at 6 stars level 60, she has a decent 28.2k HP, 4.6k attack, with a little bit low but still okay 2.7k MDef and PDef. Her attack speed at 107 does put her a little bit on the low side of the mid-range, but still in the mid-range. She does have a slight increase on her crit stat, which does make her a little bit more ability to crit on those attacks, so she can be used as a little bit of a damage dealer. As you transcend her up and get her to the max at +5, her HP goes to a very decent 42.3k, which is very good for an epic grade Elune. Her attack goes up to 6.9k, which again is pretty decent for an epic grade. Her physical and magic defense end at a okay 4.1k and 4k respectively. Looking in at her skills, her first skill is a basic frontline only skill that does physical damage to an enemy. This skill deals 110 plus 105% of her attack as physical damage. As the skill is leveled up to the max at +6, it does 900 plus 148% of her attack as physical damage, making it a decently hard-hitting skill. Her special skill, Whip It Good. This one is a multi-hit attack dealing 7 hits. This deals a decent 170 plus 160% as physical damage to the target, but also applies a weakening effect that reduces their max HP by 20% of her attack for 3 turns. This is especially useful against bosses or anything that you want to reduce the HP on. This skill, as it is leveled up to the max at +6, goes up to a very nice 1370 plus 202% of her attack as physical damage. The weakening effect also goes up to 40% of her attack and goes for a duration of 4 turns, meaning that you can apply this to multiple enemies before having to cycle back around to the first one to reapply it. This is a frontline only skill, so if you're using her for PvP, this will be used against anybody in the front, usually meaning the tanks, which reducing their max HP is helpful. Her ultimate skill. This is again a frontline only skill. As with all of her skills, you cannot attack anybody in the back line, meaning that you have to use her for attacking frontline enemies. This skill hits a large number of times at 26, and deals a total of 280 plus 270% of her attack as physical damage. If the target is male, as most tanks are, then it will inflict a spell effect that charms that target for 2 turns. This is a good effect to apply to any target, as the charm effect is helpful for dealing with the enemy. This effect does go up. Once you get it up to max at 6, it goes up to a very hard-hitting 1880 plus 377% of her attack as physical damage, and the charm effect goes up to 3 turns, making this a pretty decent skill for dealing with those frontline enemies. However, though it attacks 26 times, and meaning the damage is going to be very small per hit, this skill does have drawbacks depending on the tank that you're attacking. As in some cases it can reduce the damage so much that you won't be taking any, in other cases it'll be reflecting it back, and then in some cases it could just make the damage equal to 0, depending on how the tank is. The charm effect does not affect female tanks, so keep that in mind. Moving on to her passive number 1. This passive, when attacking a male enemy, it heals her HP by 20% of the damage dealt. As a lot of the Elunes that you're going to be fighting against are going to be male, but there are female ones, this means that every time she attacks anything that is male, she heals herself by 20% of the damage that she deals, allowing her to heal some depending on the enemy you attack. Her second passive. When she is attacked by a male enemy, which will happen quite often, she has a 30% chance of inflicting a charm spell effect to the attacker for 2 turns. This is very good, especially with dealing with male enemies that like to AoE, as this can put a spell effect on them that will charm them for 2 turns with a 30% chance. This can be helpful, especially, like I said, dealing with males that like to AoE. Like, for example, McCarthy. He has 2 AoEs that will go constantly. Baldur is another one that has an AoE skill that is typically spammed, as well as Arslan that has a skill too that is also an AoE that is spammed, meaning that even if they are not targeting directly and they are AoEing on her every time they attack, they have a 30% chance of charming themselves, which is decent. Moving on to her last passive, this is one that does make her very helpful and very useful for many situations, including PvE and PvP. What this one does is every time after she attacks, if you have a male ally, a random one will attack the same target with their basic skill. If you have Thanatos, a tank, on the team, then Thanatos is the one that is always selected, and he will always attack with this first one. This skill with Thanatos will increase its damage by 30%. However, if you do not have him on the team and you have more than one male ally, it will pick a random one. However, if you only have one male ally, which would be a good choice for her with this because of this passive, that male will always be the one that attacks. This makes her especially useful for certain Elunes, such as Kongrim, as Kongrim needs multiple turns to hit a single target before he can apply his Mark of Death to one-shot the target in PvP. This means if you bring Lilith and he is the only male on the team, every time she attacks, he will also attack, gaining that extra attack so that he can build up those 3 turns of damage to that target to apply the Mark of Death. This makes it easier and quicker to apply that Mark of Death to the enemy target so that he can now one-shot them quicker. This makes it very good, but also makes her very useful for other situations too, such as boss fights. If you're using, again, you can use Kongrim for the boss fight to apply that Mark of Death, or you can also use Baldur in certain fights, especially in the level 11 and 12 stages of certain bosses. You can use her with the Baldur, as that Baldur will apply those blaze effects with his skill 1, and does good damage. You can use her to attack the target and have Baldur more turns to apply those blaze effects. This allows you to kill the target even quicker. Looking in at the skill gems for her, her first skill rec is a red-orange and has a 5% chance to bleed the target for 1 turn. This is completely up to you if you want to have this chance, as the skill does do okay damage and goes up to a decent amount, and her base stats aren't too bad. The red-orange isn't a bad option, but you can also go with another red for more physical, or you can go with orange options for more crit, so that she crits more often and to do more damage. Her second skill is a red-orange indigo. As the skill does affect the max HP, the indigo isn't bad, as it will do even more. The bonus of this skill for the completed set of skill gems is a 5% chance of increasing damage the target receives by 10% for 2 turns. This is very low, but is a chance. However, if you go with the full indigo set, that would make the HP reduction even higher on this skill, making it in certain situations, especially with bosses, making it a little bit easier to deal with them. Her last skill, the ultimate skill of the skill gem effect, is red-orange violent for physical crit rate and speed. This gives a 10% chance of removing a target's violent tolerance effect. This means that you can reduce a tolerance effect on the target with a 10% chance, which isn't a bad thing and is decent, so it could be a very viable option for this skill, as the other options would be mainly for damage on this skill. Having the full skill gem effect to reduce that tolerance effect would be a good option, and is something I would probably recommend for her, even though it is a low chance. Moving on to the Dimension Slate stats that you would want to focus on her. She does have some debuffs, so going with accuracy is always going to be a plus. She is an epic and will have lower base stats, and especially if you're using her on those 11 stages of boss fights, you're going to need the physical magic defense as well as the HP. So getting those stats bumped up is going to be critical for her if you're using her for those boss fights. If you're using her more as a support DPS role or as extra DPS role alongside a male DPS, then having the higher attack and crit rate is decent. The speed is depending on how you want to use her in the fight and what rotation or what order you want her to go in. So get the speed accordingly if you want to go for that here. The gear options are varied for her depending on what you want to do. And in many cases, if you're going to use her in boss fights, you're going to want to have her with some survivability, meaning that you can go with an HP in the offhand. However, she does do decent damage, so having an attack in the offhand is good as long as you have the other stats to make up for it to keep her survivability high. You can go with the Corrupted Elune set to give her more chances of obtaining a soul at the end of every other turn. If you want to use her as a damage dealer, the Great Spirit set isn't a bad option, but so is the Baron J set. However, when using the Baron J set, if going with a full set, you want to make sure that you can have a weakened effect on the enemy target so that she does more damage with a higher crit rate. Another option for her is going to be one of the Violent Rune sets. Applying that on her gives her the chance to move a second time by 20%, meaning that if you are running her with something like a Congram or something else, then it just gives them more chances of attacking because she would get an additional turn, which is not a bad option. You can also run her on a full Debuffer set to give her, which is one of the newer sets, and you can have that to give her the ability to land those debuffs. The Full Moon set is another option, as it does give her a higher chance to land those charm effect debuffs. Overall, Lilith is a very useful Elune, especially if you run her with certain teammates. Congram is just one example of somebody that you can run her with, but you can run her with many other people. As I said, Baldur is another option depending on what you're doing. But if you bring her with only one tank or one male damage dealer, then she will bring that person all the time, meaning that if you bring her and you bring one male DPS on your team, that male DPS will be the one that's attacking, making it so that you're attacking that person more often. That's going to be it for this one. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them below and I will answer them as soon as I can. Thank you.